Hey everyone, Matthew Perry here, and I want to welcome you to the All Around Spurgeon podcast. This is episode number 9, I believe. And today we're going to be talking about how Spurgeon and the time that Spurgeon spoke to the nation. Um, England, back on October the 7th, 1857, had called for a day of prayer and fasting. So they end up having this event at the Crystal Palace, which was able to seat, the record was that they seated 23,654 people. Again, October 7th, 1857. They had a pretty significant program, but they were trying to figure out, who do we ask to preach? And so they tabbed the preacher from the New Park Street Chapel, Charles Spurgeon, 23 years old, to come and to deliver a message that was not only for the crowd there, but was also for the nation and for the empire. What was the day of prayer and fasting about? Well, the people of India, was one of the colonies of Britain, well, they had finally had enough and they rebelled. And that rebellion sent shockwaves throughout the rest of the empire. Not long before, we're talking 1857, well, in 1776, they had lost a jewel colony in the United States, and now they were seeing another jewel leave. And when we begin to look at what all is transpiring here, I really think it's amazing that they asked Spurgeon to preach. Spurgeon had never really been one to hold back. It was very clear that he loved empire, which we talked about on a previous episode. He loved the empire. He loved the queen. He would say, God save the queen, without any kind of reservation, but that would never diminish from the citizenship that he held in heaven. And when you take a look at the sermon that he preached, he chose to go from Micah 6:9, and I'm pulling this up on one of my side screens here. So if you happen to be watching, then that's why you're seeing a profile of me. Micah 6:9 said, "Hear ye the rod, and who hath appointed it?" So this was the basis of Spurgeon's speech. This was the basis of his sermon about the rod, because the rod had been given to the people of India, the natives that were there. It was not what you would call a benevolent rule that England had in India. Quite the opposite, with the belief that Christianity was superior. And if you read Spurgeon's sermon, the Hindus were seen by him as filthy, as disgusting, as demonic. So there felt like there was probably a bit of superiority because of the Christianity that supposedly England held. However, they were not acting in a Christian manner. And so when you read through Spurgeon's sermons, I want to give you a quote from that I've included in the book here. He's talking at the beginning of his sermon about the rod that has fallen upon the country. "Oh, my friends, what a rod that has just fallen upon our country. My poor words will fall infinitely short of the fearful tale of misery and woe, which must be told before you. You can know how smartly God hath smitten and how sternly he hath chidden us. We have today to mourn over revolted subjects, for today a part of our fellow countrymen are in open arms against our government." So Spurgeon would go on in the sermon to acknowledge that India willingly subjected themselves to the Empire of England. Now, how willingly they did, whether it's willingly like, yes, this is great, or whether it was willingly with a gun to the head and a sword to the throat, we don't know what the willingness looks like, but I think we can pretty well get a good idea. But either way, they were subjects. And so the thought of subjects going after the authority and the rule there was just an unconscionable thing. And so Spurgeon who loves country and who loves empire, who loves England, was saddened by this. But he wasn't to the point of where he was going to be so blinded that he didn't see the rotten rule that was going on over the natives there, and how it was a sorry witness for Christianity there. And as Spurgeon went on, he's brilliant in how he does this. If you read through the sermon, you see that, he's talking about, boy, it was really terrible that they would rebel and mutiny against England. Then he starts going in, but it's also bad how the government was doing them. But then he really sticks it, because what he wants us to do is to make sure that we understand the gospel. And there's a group that's around that he's been avoiding talking about until he gets toward the last third, the last quarter of the sermon. Listen to what he says. He says that I am afraid that it is the church that has been the greatest sinner. How about that? He goes on. The churches themselves slumbered. They wrapped themselves in a shroud of orthodoxy, and they slept right on. And while Satan was devouring the world and taking his prey, the church sat still and said, "Who is my neighbor?" and did not arouse herself to serve her God. I do hope that we have already seen the beginning of a revival. The last year has seen more preaching than any year since the days of the apostles. We are stirring in ragged schools and in various efforts for doing good, but still the church is only half awake. I fear she still slumbers. O Church of God, awake, 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 for verily the rod has fallen for thy sake. This, what he says, judgment begins at the house of God. 1 Peter 4:17 says this. And so while he is speaking to the nation, and yes, he's speaking to a nation that has so many underpinnings of Christianity and a Judeo-Christian ethic, I don't see him combining the nation with the church. He's talking to the church. He's talking to those that have professed Christ, that have professed to love God more than anything else, and to love your neighbor as yourself. This is the church that he is talking to. And it's here that the rod is falling. And God is the one that appointed the rod to fall on England, on India, on the church. He's the one who's appointed it. Spurgeon was just brilliant in this. He knew how to take an audience from point A and meet them on common ground and bring them exactly where they need to be, and then give the old heave-ho when it was time to drive home the point of the gospel, the point of confession and repentance, a true fast day service, not because of the sadness that the government has been rebelled against, but of the sadness of the sleepiness of the church. So I'll put it in the notes where you can read more. And you can actually read through the sermon. You can see the whole outline of the fast day service. But remember, this was 23,654 people that without amplification were able to hear every word that Spurgeon said. And thankfully we are able, because this was written down, we're able to go back and read a sermon that was around, 167 years ago. And it still packs a punch every bit as much as if it were preached today. And the fact that the government asked a preacher to be the keynote speaker. Yes, it was a fast day service, so it had some religious overtones, of course. But the fact that Spurgeon could be in that spot and that God would use him to deliver such a powerful message, it's a reminder for us that God can and will use us, but we must be ready. We must be ready to be used by him. We must be moving forward with the gifts that God has given to us in our day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-by-minute lives. But when the time comes, we know that God will give us everything that we need to do everything that he commands us. So let me know what you think. What do you think about this sermon that Spurgeon preached, this fast day sermon, October 7th, 1857 to 23,654 people? I'd love to hear from you. All right. Thanks for joining us on this episode of All Around Spurgeon. Again, my name is Matthew Perry. I'm lead pastor at Arapahoe Road Baptist Church in Centennial, Colorado. You can look us up at arbc.net, or you can look up more articles that we have at allaroundspurgeon.substack.com. It'd be great to start developing this community in our little slice of Spurgeon scholarship. It's wonderful to be able to be with you right now. All right. Take care.